Hi, this is Adam L.A.O. Berkowitz from Israel 365 News. I'm here tonight with my dear friend, Pastor Trey Graham. He's an author, speaker, radio host, and he's the senior pastor of the First Melissa in North Texas. And I was just giving him a compliment. He is one of the few people I know who really gets Israel. He knows Israel. He understands it, and he can understand what's really important to Israel in America. And it's really not as common as people think. So we're here to talk about the midterm elections and what happened and what it means for Christian Zionists in particular and what it means for Israel. So Pastor Trey, what happened? It was a bit crazy. I still can't figure it out.
Well, as we record this interview, the votes are still being counted. So
isn't that crazy? That's crazy.
Well, it's because we have in America, especially in certain states, created a very loose system of mail-in ballots. And remember, this is a big country. We talked last week about Israeli elections. It's a small country and everything is nationalized in Israel. This is a very big country with 50 states, so you have 50 different election laws. And even within states, you have counties. Like in the great state of Texas, there are 254 counties. So at some times you have county laws underneath state laws with federal oversight in some cases. So meaning everybody plays by different rules. So some states have very strict, your mail-in ballot has to be postmarked before Election Day or on Election Day, or it has to be received by Election Day. But if you postmark it on Election Day, the states that allow that, well, it's not going to be received for 2, 3, 4, 5 days. So votes keep being counted days after the election. If the election is a blowout, if it's a huge margin, then the mail-in ballots don't matter much. But if it's a very close election, you can't call the race because you're still waiting on outstanding ballots.
When I was young, when I started voting, there were these voting machines. There were these big clunky metal things. You had a curtain that went behind you, and they actually had these levers that you would move. And then as you finished voting, a rod would come along and push all the levers back in place. And I don't remember waiting so long to hear the results. I would have thought that computers would make it all so much easier. And
well, it depends on the state you're in. Again, in Texas, especially where I live in the Dallas area, it's touchscreen. Now, the touchscreen, you vote, it then prints out a piece of paper. So you make your selection on a touchscreen, then a ballot piece of paper is printed out. You take that, you submit it into another machine, and that reads the paper. And so you have the electronic reading of it, and you have a paper backup copy. But again, what's holding up this is the mail-in ballots. And this was greatly expanded in 2020 for COVID reasons.
I remember.
The idea was people are uncomfortable going to a polling place because it's in a crowd and you're going to get COVID. And so they greatly expanded the mail-in ballot system. And they used medical reasons and sanitation reasons as the support for that. Now, those who accuse people of cheating say mail-in ballots are more susceptible to cheating. That's one of the accusations, because how do I know that it was you, Mr. Berkowitz, who wrote your ballot and signed your name and mailed it in? And there's supposed to be verification systems. And some people trust it and believe it to be reliable. Others don't. But the number of mail-in ballots, whether they're reliable or not, in your opinion, the number of them has exploded. And therefore, the votes come in later than Election Day. And as I said a minute ago, if it's a close race, they really matter. And that's what's going on in Nevada and Arizona, especially. Now, Georgia in the Senate race in the U.S. is a different thing, because in Texas, if you get the leading vote getter is the winner. So you can win with 35% of the vote or 45% of the vote. In Georgia state law, you have to have 50% plus one if it's a multi-person race. So in the Georgia Senate race, the current senator is Raphael Warnock, who is a pastor, a reverend, and he is a Democratic senator from Georgia. He's the current senator. His main opponent was Herschel Walker, the famous former NFL football player. But there was a third person in the race who got 81,000 something votes. Well, that means neither Warnock nor Walker got over 50%. So if the final was like 49 to 48, they have to go to a runoff. This is exactly what happened in Georgia 2 years ago. So that's what's holding up the Georgia race, is nobody got over 50%. What's holding up Arizona and Nevada is all of these mail-in ballots. And so by most projections, the U.S. Senate currently stands at 49 Republicans, 48 Democrats, leaving 3 states not called. Arizona and Nevada are waiting on final vote counts. Georgia has already been decided. December the 6th, a month from now, will be the runoff. And the guy who came in third place, who got 1.2 or some percent of the vote, won't be in the runoff. So the control of the Senate is very much in question as we speak. The House, you have the same vote counting issues. So a lot of House races have not been called, but it's expected that the Republicans will get over the 218 majority. There's 435 seats in the U.S. House among the 50 states based upon population distribution. To get a majority of 435, you got to get to 218. Well, the Republicans were expected to have a huge wave, and we can talk about that they might get to 235 or 240. Well, they're not going to get anywhere near that. They're expected to get around 221, 222, something like that. So they will have presumably like an 8 or 10 seat majority, which is a majority. But as we talked about with Knesset elections, we've got a 61-59 Knesset majority.
Yeah.
You have a majority, but it's a precarious one. And that's what's probably going to end up in the House and in the Senate here.
Okay, it's funny you keep talking about the House and the Senate. It is hugely important because this is where the legislation comes from, and things have become. It used to be, politics was all about wheeling and dealing, and you could make deals with people across the aisle, but now we're dealing with everything is so polarized, and the two sides are so far apart that if you don't have that majority, you're not going to do anything. And if you have the majority, you can do things that most people don't like. So it's a real problem. And so you were talking about there was an anticipated red wave, and even some pundits I really respected, like Ben Shapiro, were predicting a red tsunami. And those people are walking around very angry.
Not even close.
Not even, wow.
They're calling it the red trickle now. Okay.
Wow.
As I said, the House is projected to be controlled by the Republicans. And the reason it's called red and blue is because about 25 years ago, that's how they started to color the maps on election day. Blues, the Democratic states, reds, the Republican states. And so the red wave was supposed to be a big majority in the House, like a 50-seat majority. And in the Senate, maybe a 5 or 6 seat majority. Well, the red wave and the red tsunami did not happen. The red trickle, as they're calling it, is what's happening. And what we're going to probably end up with is a small Republican majority in the House, a Democratic president, and then we're still wondering what's going to happen in the Senate, because currently in the U.S. Senate, it is 50-50. But according to the Constitution, the vice president is called the president of the Senate. So Kamala Harris, our vice president, has set the world record for U.S. vice presidents for breaking ties, because she is always standing by the Senate chamber, because if there's a 50-50 vote, the vice president gets to break the tie. We may end up back there again with a divided 50-50 Senate, which effectively gives control to the Democrats because of the vice president. So you will have one House Republican, one chamber in the Senate, Democrat, potentially, if it's 50-50 and she gets the tie-breaking vote. But you're going to have a Democratic president. So even if you have a Republican House and Senate, you have a Democratic president with the veto pen, and you got to get 2/3 majorities to override a veto, and no party is going to get anywhere close to that. So you're looking at potentially a stalemate, as they call it, or gridlock on the legislative front. But what will really change if, as expected, the Republicans control the U.S. House is they control all the committees because they have the majority. They will get the committee chairmanships. So they will determine what committees exist, what committees don't, and what the committees do. So the first thing you will see in a Republican majority House in January is the elimination of the January 6th committee. The committee that's been investigating the January 6th riot, incident, insurrection, depending on whose terms you're using, that committee that's been designed to blame it all on Trump, that committee will immediately be dissolved. It will no longer exist.
I'm so glad we're doing this just for this one point. You just made my night much happier.
Well, and those who have been running the January 6th committee, their hope is that their effort will not stop, even though their committee will, because they've had a year to gather evidence, as they have called it. They gather testimonies and videos, and it was a horrible event. It shouldn't have happened, no question. But they're going to turn all of that over to the Department of Justice, so they hope that the DOJ will pursue it because the committee will be dissolved.
So I'll ask you for $100 worth of the $1 million question. Okay. Where did the tsunami go?
It's a big, big question, and people are going to be answer that for years. So here are a few thoughts. Historically speaking, it should have been, and that's why it was predicted to be the tsunami. Why?
A lot of that was due to Biden's dismal approval ratings, which in midterm elections, if the president is down, then there's a big turnover.
That's exactly why it was predicted, why it should have happened. The out party in a midterm, especially the out party in a president's first term midterm, always does poorly. It happens to every president in recent decades, except for George W. Bush in the 2002 midterms, because that occurred right after 9/11/2001. So George W. Bush, the Texan, by the way, it didn't happen to him. Okay, every other recent president, Reagan, Bush Sr., Clinton, Obama, it happened to all of them. Why didn't it happen in this election is the question. And there's a number of theories. So we'll just throw them out because we'll discuss them because nobody can pinpoint anything this soon. The Trump factor is a big question. Those who support Trump and believe his policies were proper and effective, believe some, that say he was duly elected and the election was stolen from him. That's what Mr. Trump still says. The Trump voters wanted Trump candidates to be in office. Trump endorsed Trump-supported candidates. J.D. Vance in Ohio is an example of that. He is going to be the next senator from Ohio, Republican. He was very much on the Trump team. He won.
But he's also a very good guy. He's a great candidate.
Well, that's, depending of the voters,
Okay.
right?
Okay.
As opposed to Pennsylvania, where Dr. Oz,
Oh my
Mehmet
gosh.
Oz, the famous TV doctor, who became famous because of the Oprah Winfrey Show, and Oprah Winfrey went out and endorsed his opponent, Fetterman. Dr. Oz was very much Trump endorsed. So you've got two examples. Dr. Oz lost. Ohio, the Trump guy won. Pennsylvania, the Trump guy lost. And you could replicate that conversation in other Senate races and in dozens of House races. So the question was the low approval of Biden and the Trump endorsement factor that was expected to create part of the red wave. Neither one of those things did happen. People who disapprove of Biden's job performance, especially on the economy, still voted for Democratic candidates. And people who thought Trump's endorsement would carry the victory, it in many cases didn't.
This is a very sensitive point because I think everyone kind of gets that, because Biden himself took this as a referendum on his presidency, on his administration, and announced the day after the elections, "Oh, I'm running in 2024," which, oh my gosh,
I intend to run.
I intend to run.
Yes.
I've had nightmares that weren't that bad. It really threw me. Which is, his approval ratings are incredibly low, historically low almost, and to see this as the fact that there was not a red tsunami, to take that as a referendum, oh, Biden's doing great, that means just more of the same.
They didn't. No one in the election on either side voted saying Biden's doing great or the economy's doing great, because it's not happening.
Well, so Biden took it that way.
Why would it happen is the question. If it's not a popular president bringing along House and Senate candidates, which did not happen and could not happen because of his approval ratings, how could this red wave have not occurred? You have to get into other topics. The Dobbs decision in the U.S. Supreme Court, which eliminated Roe v. Wade and made abortion a state-by-state issue, as it was in America before 1973 and Roe v. Wade, that issue has become very significant for voters. You would vote for a Democratic candidate if you call them pro-choice, as they say, pro-abortion, as others would say. You're going to vote for that candidate because of that issue, ignoring Biden and the economy, because that would have been your primary motivation to vote.
Social issues like that.
I don't want Trump to do well because I don't want Trump to run again, so I'm not going to dare vote for the Trump endorsed candidate, is another reason.
You think?
I know so. Because Trump is going to claim victory in every race where he endorsed someone. Now, Trump sometimes helped. Sometimes Trump would endorse the candidate who was already going to win by 20 points. Okay, and then claim a victory in that situation. So there are people who would vote against Trump endorsed candidates because they don't want Trump to run again. So this is very complex, and the predictions of the red wave were too simplistic. Unpopular president, bad economy equals red wave. Well, we've got an unpopular president and a bad economy, and we didn't have the red wave, meaning this was much more complex.
In a way, that's good, because I don't like polarization. Polarization breeds too much hatred and nothing gets done. So if we can go back to negotiating, to living with each other, to talking, I would be much happier. I'm still I can't believe that Trump is still a factor. Trump
is a factor because he's the former president. He's got the biggest microphone on the Republican side, and Trump is a factor because he wants to be a factor.
Yeah.
and inserts himself into the conversation. For those who like him or don't like him, you cannot deny he constantly inserts himself into these races. And some people, that means they will vote for a candidate, and some that means they will not. And what I'm saying is everybody who voted on more nuanced issues, and whether it was pro-abortion or anti-abortion, pro-Trump, anti-Trump, pro-Biden, anti-Biden. Nobody could say they voted for this economy because it's in bad shape. But there's other reasons why you would have voted. And then you have to get into the main topic, or a major topic that is, called candidate recruitment. In America, we still vote for the person, not the party, as opposed to the Knesset elections that we talked about on the last conversation. Some people here vote for party, period. If they're an R, I vote for them. If they're a D, I vote for them.
I mean, Fetterman was the clearest case of that.
There you go. You vote for a D because he's a D, not because of the quality of the candidates. But the Republicans, if you're an R, you ran some candidates that were lesser quality than other potential candidates. And when people went to the polls and they said guy A versus guy B, don't care what their party is, guy A is more qualified than or competent than guy B, I'm going to pick the one that I think is more eloquent in how they speak. They had a better policy. They came to my town to visit me. They promote policies I agree with. And so candidate quality is an issue in all of these races, which is actually a very important thing that we and the people you and I hang out with need to talk about. Because quality candidates, God-loving, God-fearing, conservative candidates, in many cases, are choosing not to run for election.
Oh, really?
Why? Because your family is going to get attacked. Your values are going to get attacked. And people are sadly saying it's not worth it.
And the media just doesn't care about the truth anymore. So they'll say anything, and as harmful as it could be. The more harm.
So you are having this candidate recruitment problem is exacerbated because the best and the brightest might not want to run because they've seen the damage that's done to families, assaults. I know a lot of these candidates personally. They say, you won't believe the voicemails I get, the emails I get, the letters I get, because I stand up for pro-life and anti-abortion, because I stand for biblical values. You can't believe the hate I get. And therefore that discourages people from running.
There's an expression in Hebrew, a spitz is something that sticks up. Like, so it says the spitz is the first thing that gets worn away and hit. And that's, I mean, I see it on social media. You know, I was never on Twitter. And I when I heard Elon Musk was I go on Twitter, and as soon as people find out I'm from Israel, boom, I get the most horrible things written to me. What can I say? So now that brings me up to the real $1 million question, and I want to give a little bit of an intro. I want to talk about Israel and Christian Zionists especially. And I want to preface this by presenting an internal conflict I have, which is historically, and I spoke to Mark Zell about this today, historically, Jews have always voted Democrat, or mostly, and one of the main reasons was the Democrats were seen as the pro-Israel party. There's now 33% Jews voting for the Republicans now. It's been a shift. There are more Jews voting for Republicans, and the interests of the American Jews is different than Israel. They don't support Israel as strongly, and the social values are different. American Jews have always been liberal. So we were talking about abortion. Abortion is legal in Israel. It's not very popular. Even secular Jews are much more family oriented than secular Jews in America. So to say that they're secular is misleading in a way. And it's certainly politically, and also the whole issue of security has turned most Israelis more conservative. We were talking about when we were talking about the Israeli election, the majority of Israel is right wing. So strangely enough, in this election, I think it's becoming more and more clear that Israel, the issue of Israel, has brought Israeli Jews much closer to evangelical Christians than to American Jews. This whole Democrat-Republican thing is driving a huge wedge between Israel and what used to be our strongest support. There was even it was Mastriano in Pennsylvania. There was this thing. It was kind of funny. Oh gosh, what was his name? In Pennsylvania.
He was running for governor. Yeah.
Doug Mastriano. He's a Republican and he's Christian. He was running against the Torah observant Jewish Democrat, and Mastriano's wife, when they were accusing her of being associated with white supremacists and everything, she said, "Oh no, as a family, we so much love Israel. In fact, I'm going to say we probably love Israel more than a lot of Jews do." And a lot of people gave her grief for that. But I'm sitting here in Israel thinking to myself, she's right. As a Christian Zionist, she probably does love Israel more than most American Jews, especially Democrats. So that being said, how did Israel do in the American elections?
Every vote, every race has many, many elements within it. And every candidate will emphasize certain things more or less. We can talk about Christian Zionism and all of that in just a second, but you're asking about how did Israel factor as an element of this midterm election?
Okay.
In my opinion, it was a very minor issue because it wasn't talked about very much. Now, the circles that you hang with and that I hang with, Israel is always on the front page. It's always a major topic. But for most American voters, I don't think that's the case. So when you have an economy that's in such bad shape, when you have this very vocal debate about abortion, when you've got charges of voter fraud and all of these things, you've got charges of voter suppression, these seem to be the more vocal topics by the majority of people. So if Israel is always on your mind, like it is for you and me and our circle, then it's going to be a factor in your vote. But for most people, it was lower down the priority list. Crime is a major problem in America. That was very high on people's list. Inflation is very high on people's list. The pro or anti-abortion discussion was very high on people's list. So I think if you asked the average voter their top 10 I'm sad to say Israel wouldn't make the top 10.
Especially if it's not a presidential election. Because the president, his purview is foreign policy. Right. Though there were reasons, I think, to be afraid, to be concerned. For example, we were talking about John Fetterman. It's interesting that Dr. Oz, he was supported by, he got a lot of Jewish support from the Zionist groups, even though he's Muslim. He's Turkish. So he's not an Arab Muslim. John Fetterman, he's expressed pro-Israel sentiments, but if you can look past his physical disabilities, his policies were extreme, really extreme left. He wants to release, half of the prisoners from jail, from the jail system. His economic policies are a nightmare, and he's expressed pro-Israel sentiments, But when he gets to Washington, he's going to start hanging out with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Rashida Tlaib, Ilhan Omar. Those are going to be his buddies, and it's pretty hard to hang with them. I think AOC is not necessarily anti-Israel or anti-Jewish, but if she wants to be in the left-wing club, that's where she's going to go. So she's definitely John Fetterman is definitely, I think, I don't think he has the personal integrity to stand by Israel as he said he would. I think he's going to fall by the wayside. You also had the race with Raphael Warnock we mentioned. Herschel Walker, I don't think he's discussed Israel, but he's a devout Christian. I see him and an old school devout Christian. I love listening to his speeches. It's like sitting in church, and not that I sit in church, but it's what I would like to think sitting in church is like. I hear a lot of amens, a lot of, and I think I can see him being very pro-Israel. Compared to that, Raphael Warnock, he is a big fan of the Nation of Islam and Louis Farrakhan. It's terrifying. And to be honest, I question his credentials as a pastor. He's pro-abortion. He loves Marxism. He's said horrible things about the U.S. military. He's just not a good guy. And so he definitely does not support it. He even referred to Jesus as a Palestinian. So, which, I don't believe in Jesus, but I love when I hear Christians are like, when they're devout and it brings them to a good space. I love that. Right. And I don't see that with him. There are a lot of races that I think that are very, very problematic came out, even though Israel was not, as you said, the central issue. It's going to be there. These people that were elected, they're going to be in Washington. Israel, they're going to have a say in American policy towards Israel. And that's very concerning for me, I think.
You're right in many of your comments that even if Israel wasn't a top 10 issue, when you vote for a candidate, you're getting all the issues from that candidate. So economics, education, tax policy, foreign policy, use of the U.S. military, all of those things come along. And especially if that candidate toes the party line of the R or the D, they're going to bring those policies, they're going to bring a vote for those policies. Now, it's rare today, especially in today's Washington, that somebody votes against their party. So if one party is considered to be pro-Israel, you can assume their members of the House and Senate will join in that. Even if it's not their personal priority, they're going to join the team. Either way, pro-Israel or anti-Israel. So you're right. There are people who may not have prioritized being pro or anti-Israel in their campaign, but they will be another vote for the team that is either pro or anti-Israel. But I wanted to make it clear that I hate to disappoint you, my friend, but most of the American voters don't think like you and I do, and Israel is not at the top of their list. So it is a result of a vote for other issues that will turn out to be either pro or anti-Israel.
I hear that. And I'm not a particularly spiritual or religious guy, okay? But the older I get and the more I live, the more I see Genesis 12:3 unfolding in front of my eyes. I mean, Donald Trump, I was in New York in the 80s when he was, the real estate mogul, and we knew who he was. Okay, so when he got elected, I was like, really? But he blessed Israel time and time again with America's interest in mind. And proof of the pudding is times were good, especially when compared to where America's holding today. Biden, he's not being straight with Israel, the whole Iran thing, Jerusalem. He's trying to open a Palestinian embassy. He's reopened relations with an aid to the Palestinians. And America is getting slammed. Even if you don't believe in the Bible, Genesis 12:3 is pretty much a mathematical formula. and
I want to remind our audience that, yes, it matters who the president is and what their viewpoint is toward Israel in this discussion. But it also matters, what I always tell our folks, is who the next 20 people are. Okay? It's vice president, it's secretary of state, it's secretary of defense, it's cabinet members, it's administration officials, it's the White House chief of staff. So yes, it matters if the president is pro-Israel or anti-Israel, but they bring along a team of people who share that viewpoint, who are actually creating the policies that turn out to be pro-Israel or anti-Israel.
True. That's true. I don't want to keep you too long, even though, my gosh, do I enjoyed time spent with you and I learned so much. I want to end on a positive note. And the big positive note of the election, I mean, the real blazing glory, was Ron DeSantis. He turned a blue state into a strongly red state, which and it was funny at his victory speech. People were chanting 2 more years, 2 more years. Which is like, because what are they saying? They're saying, no, you're not going to be the governor for 4 years. We want you 2 years governor, and then after that, you're going to the White House. So it was a beautiful thing. I want to tell a quick story that a lot of people don't know. Ron DeSantis, I think it was in 2020. Let me see if I can find this. When it was in 2020, he brought a group of businessmen, a large group. In 2019, he led a delegation of more than 90 leading citizens on a trade mission to Israel. And he finished up his trip with a visit to the Western Wall. And when he went to the Western Wall, he prayed. He's Roman Catholic. I think he's Roman Catholic, though he's now Christian. He I'm not really sure. I don't want to. I'll let him tell us how he believes. But he was at the Kotel, at the Western Wall, and he prayed. And he put a little slip of paper, a note in the wall, as many people do. And someone took it out and checked it. And it said, please save my state from hurricanes this season. It was just before hurricane season. And it worked. He also had several Orthodox Jews in his administration. He is, I think, in a very organic way, he is a friend of Israel. And I think it also has to do with the values. And I think his moral sense, he has a problem. People, they try to point out in his state there is anti-Semitism and they have the Nazi thing going on. They try to pin that on him, but he is a true friend of Israel. As a Jew in Israel, I can tell you that there's no game there. He's not putting on a face. He's a serious dude. And he carried, 4 senators?
Congressional seats.
Congressional seats came out of Florida. I think Ron DeSantis is a bright spot of the election, I think.
He is. He did very, very well in the election. And as we talked in our discussion about Israeli politics, I told you then that I apply this to Israeli politics and American politics. I, as a voter, I'm looking for a God-fearing, God-loving, Bible-believing person and a person who is competent in their job. I want somebody who has those 2 qualifications. And Ron DeSantis has shown himself to be very competent in the job. And remember what makes or breaks a governor of Florida, and that is, how do you handle the aftermath of hurricanes?
Yeah.
Because they are coming. He has shown himself to be someone who gets stuff done, gets roads repaired and bridges repaired and trash and debris cleaned up and food distributed. He gets stuff done. And so that's one of the reasons he did so well in this election, is because he has been a competent leader, a competent manager of the affairs of the state.
He was also hugely competent with the COVID crisis.
Well, and that's both a competence discussion and a values discussion.
Yeah.
And you mentioned his post-election victory speech. He must have said woke 100 times in the speech. We're not woke. We won't give in to woke. We reject
Florida is where woke comes to die.
Yes, he said it 100 times. So that is a competence thing, because we believe that schools will run better and businesses will run better, etc., if it's not taken over by that ideology. But it's not just a competence discussion. That's a values discussion. We reject the ideology that goes along with woke, and therefore he says our state is going to be better. So he's trying to earn points, and he is on both sides of that equation.
He's also another character trait that he has that those two traits you mentioned are incredibly important and necessary, and sorely lacking in so many candidates. Another thing that sets him apart is there's another Israeli expression, "Hu lo ro'eh af echad mimeter." He doesn't see anyone from a meter away, which Israelis mean to say he doesn't care. He doesn't see you. He's not afraid of you. He's just boom. And I have seen him with the media. Oh my goodness! And in his debates, in the debate, his opponent threw him some curveballs, and he handled them like lo ro'eh af echad mimeter. He went for it. And I like that. We need that in a leader, and so I think he was pretty good in that. So Pastor Trey, like I said, I could talk to you all day. I hope one day soon I will. We'll hang out and have a nice cup of coffee in Tiberia or Jerusalem, or maybe you'll come up to the Golan and hang out with me on my back deck. Is there any good words you can leave us with?
Voters in Israel, voters in America, please pray, please vote, please make your opinions and values heard, please run for office. I tell people in our church, if you think everybody on the ballot is a clown, then you need to run for office. And once people are elected, remind the office holders they work for you. They work for you. They ought to represent your values. And I know from all the elected officials I know that phone calls really do matter.
Yep.
Letters and emails really do matter. If you will make your voice heard, not only at the ballot box, but for the next 2 years or 4 years, you as a voter can have an influence. You must speak up and remind them that they are there to represent you. And if there's enough of you who represent a certain viewpoint, pro-Bible, pro-Israel, pro-God in this conversation, if there's enough people saying that, the elected officials will listen.
Amen. Amen. Thank you so much, Pastor Trey. It's always amazing speaking to you. Be blessed.
Blessings, brother.